Alrighty, so we will do roll call first. Trustee Rhodey,
Yep.
and then Trustee Krasovich,
Here.
Trustee Roberts,
Here.
Trustee Gergen,
Here.
President Knutson, Trustee Grabowski, and Belt are excused. Can I call for nominations for acting as chair for the meeting?
I'd like to
I'd like to
nominate
nominate
Mr.
Bob Rhodey.
Trustee Roberts.
Oh! Is there a duel then, or how do we?
Who spoke first, please?
I believe it was me. It was me. Obviously.
Nominated Craig. Do we have a second?
I'm not sure what I'm seconding.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Bob nominated Craig.
I second the nomination. Was it?
So we can have another nomination, right?
You can.
Do you really not want to do
Do we
it?
vote first
No,
and
that's
then,
fine.
or do we do another one? Okay.
Take them for the team, Craig.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, bear with me. First item on the agenda then is public hearing regarding ordinance 2023-18 regarding amending a section of the village code related to the limited sale and display of automobiles, light trucks, and motorcycles in the B5 Light Industrial Zone District. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on that particular topic? Oh, okay. Thank you. Next, approval of the minutes.
Close the public hearing at 6:03. You have to close the public hearing formally, so,
Oh, okay.
thank you.
Close the public hearing. Next item, approval of the minutes from September 5th. Anyone have any comments, corrections to those minutes?
Motion to approve September 5th meeting minutes.
Second, Gergen.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Fourth item, citizen comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to share their opinions with board members on any topic you want. However, due to open meeting laws, the board is not able to answer any questions or respond to any comments. All comments should be directed to the board. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes each. And we ask the speakers use the podium, state your name and your address for the record. Is there anybody here that would like to make a comment tonight on anything? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jody Canning-Tarina, and I live in the Lake Park subdivision, and so I'm here to dispute. 689 Laureate Court. And I live in the Lake Park subdivision. My backyard is Lindsay Road, and I've noticed increased traffic in the 10 years that I've lived there. And I think putting a stoplight at that intersection is a horrible idea.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment? Yes, please.
I'm back again. Jody Zellinger, 538 Cutmeyer Drive, on the weed issue. I have emailed a few trustees as well as Jeff Knutson, and talking with them about partnering with the sanitary district. I get one story from the sanitary district and I get another story from you and our stories aren't jiving. It's like one says that you don't want to work with them and the other says that they don't want to work with us. So somehow we have to come to a better understanding because I think we can both benefit from it, from working together. I also think we need to improve our harvesting equipment because it always seems to be down, and we're graciously being offered from the sanitary district the use of theirs. I think the lake is a huge asset to the village, but by not keeping the weeds and the bird crap off the beach, as well as cleaning up around the residents' piers and stuff, it really is not appealing for people to come down to the lake. And as well, the residents cannot use their frontage because we have so many thick weed piles, especially on Kottmeyer Drive, like I've stated in the past. When you hire someone to replace Dan Nays as he retires, I hope you will take a deep look at that person and make sure that they have a vested interest in helping us maintain the lake to a more appealing level. We went to the last ski show of the season, and the stench down there was horrible, and the people around us were commenting on it, as well as when the skiers were getting out of the water, they were covered in weeds. So I really think that village board needs to take a different approach in managing the weeds for Pewaukee Lake. Thank you.
Anyone else on this side that have a comment?
Hi there, John Krieger, 520 Kottmeyer. Just want to mirror what Jody said. I just live a few doors down from her, and we've had the same issue. We moved in here in 2017, the summer of, and it was a great summer. Had a great collection. The weed issue wasn't really that bad at all. But every summer since we've been here, it's gradually gotten worse and worse and worse and thicker and thicker and thicker. I would agree that there needs to be better maintenance with them clearing in between the piers, around the piers. There's just lots of just piles. It's thick, caked. I go in there, I'm just covered in. I feel like the Blob from that movie back in the 80s. It's bad. Also, I noticed too is that it's been so thick and stanky is that I've heard a new sound, bullfrogs. Like you hear bullfrogs like in the swamp. And now I've heard a few kind of gathering in the area too, because it's just been so thick and swamp-like in our area. So I hope we can get better control and better management of our weeds. Thank you.
Anyone else on this side? This side, anyone have any comments to make? All right, going to close citizen comments then. Go on to ordinance. The first one is ordinance regarding 2023-18, regarding the amending the code pertaining to limited sales and display of automobiles, light trucks, and motorcycles in the B5 Light Industrial Zoning District. Mary, you want to take that on?
The village doesn't currently have permission for any vehicle sales, new or used, in any district in the village. And it's my understanding that that's historic and intentional, that that's not in our code presently. But we have an auto service business that is approved and operating under a conditional use grant over at 600 Hickory Street, who refurbishes vehicles, that sort of thing, but they are in the B5 zoning district, and have came asking to the Planning Commission first in consultation and then eventually as an action item, would you consider allowing new and used car sales as a permitted use within the B5 district, provided it's accessory and incidental to a principal use that is automotive service related? And they went on to say, even in their application, we don't even need permission for outdoor display of vehicles or indoor display of vehicles. In the state of Wisconsin, to hold a dealer's license, you have to have an address that has approved zoning for the use automotive sales. And so these folks who sometimes engage in essentially what are title transfers between parties without ever displaying a vehicle, the use isn't there in our code. And so the question faced by the Planning Commission was, do you want to enable that on a limited basis? And if so, describe the limitations. So the conclusion by the Planning Commission was, yes, we would like to facilitate this, very limited, but even beyond what was originally asked for. I think the Commission was being foresighted about incorporating into the language that's in front of you tonight the possibility for outdoor display and indoor display of vehicles on a very limited basis. So specifically how they have written this permission into the code and recommended it to the board for tonight's consideration is as a conditional use in the B5 zoning district only. And they have said regular automobile light truck, and motorcycle sales and display use, not to exceed 3 outdoor vehicle display spaces or up to 3 indoor vehicle display spaces, as a subordinate and accessory use conducted in support, oh, there it is. Thought I crashed there for a moment. Conducted in support of an approved principal conditional use automotive service facility. Okay? So it has to be accessory and incidental. It goes on to say that the outside display shall only be permitted during the regular business hours of the principal use on the property. Then it goes on to define regular automobile as an auto, including van or sport utility vehicle, when more than 50% of the internal capacity is dedicated to seating and eligible to be licensed by the state of Wisconsin DOT as a regular automobile. It describes light truck as a motor truck with original manufacturer's design features intended to facilitate carrying cargo and pulling loads, and eligible to be licensed by Wisconsin DOT as a light truck. Describes motorcycles as 2- or 3-wheeled motor vehicles steered by a handlebar from a saddle-type seat, eligible to be licensed by Wisconsin DOT as a motorcycle or moped. So those 3 definitions track very closely and make use of the language straight out of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's vehicle licensing permissions. So that really is what is proposed to be added. The Planning Commission supported it, made their recommendation to you. I'll turn it over to the board tonight for any questions or discussion.
I can add a couple of things to part of that consideration is we don't want to encourage car sales. And the concern always is that when you amend any kind of zoning ordinance for a particular applicant, you always have to worry about what's that next one going to ask for, or what's the potential implications. And so the way Mary suggested the writing of this, we think we've addressed that on 3 things. The fact it is conditional. Second is that it has to be a subordinate use. So that way you don't get the large car lot kind of mentality here. And the third is that such a limited display, and they can't display it, have those out at night. It really makes it so that if it's a service business and they happen to have a car that they then want to sell, it doesn't restrict them from doing that. It just prevents that next business coming in as a car sales place coming. So that was the rationale pretty much behind that, the way it was drafted.
I think it sounds perfectly reasonable, and I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2023-18 as presented.
Second, Rhodey.
Give a motion in a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Next item, possible action on ordinance 2023-19 to amend and create a salary range for village employees. And this is you, Scott.
Yes. The board at the last meeting reviewed proposed adjustments to salary ranges, and I think in concept concurred with moving forward with those. So the ordinance you have before you indicates what those changes would be, which is reflective of what was shown at the last meeting. I do want to note that, and Mark, please correct me if I speak incorrectly on statutes, that the municipal judge has requested consideration of a change in salary. Current salary is $12,000, and I believe that was last updated in 2019. And her request is for $1,000 change, and if I'm remembering Mark's communication on this correctly, it can be adjusted but wouldn't be taking effect until the next year of the term starts, which would be April.
That's right.
Thank you, Mark.
And did you do an analysis as to if we put this into effect, what it would it change any salaries that we currently have? Are any of them on the low end of this?
We would have some employees that would be at the low end of the new range, but we do have the merit evaluations that will be conducted this fall, which would give them an opportunity to move within that range.
But none of them are below what we're suggesting.
I think there might be one public works employee that might be $100 or $200 below currently, or what the new range would be. But the new range would take effect January 1 of '24.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so we could hold off in considering that municipal judge raise. We've got time before the term changes, correct?
But she's currently within the 4-year term now? 5-year term for judge? She's within her current term, but the salary can't change until the next year begins, so April. So
But we could consider it at the next couple of meetings.
Yes.
And
Yeah, you could leave it the same as it is and then come back and we would just do a separate ordinance to amend that salary at that time.
because I would prefer, first of all, that we have closer to a full village board, but also an understanding of where we are versus what comparable positions are.
Any other questions, comments? Anyone want to make a motion on this particular item?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2023-19, amending and creating salary ranges for village employees.
Second, Rhodey?
We have a motion and a second. No other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Thanks, Mary. Next, we have a resolution, Resolution 2023-15, to establish the annual trick-or-treat date and time for the Village of Pewaukee. So we don't have to do it every single year.
Correct.
Oh, yes. This is why everyone's here tonight, right?
As we discussed at the last board meeting, when we determined the date for this year, we brought the resolution that I think there was a consensus on, as far as having it the Saturday before Halloween from 4 to 7, or on Halloween if it fell on.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2023-15 as presented.
Second, Krasovich.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Old business, discussion regarding the strategic plan. Well, should we push it to the bottom? We'll push it to
Yeah.
the bottom. We'll go on to new business first. What?
The meeting even, right?
Good, if it gets long.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to new business. Presentation of the fire and EMS fee study, discussion, direction related to next steps.
Okay, so Matt Stark with Baker Tilly was one of the team of 3 and the lead analyst, I believe, on the study, and is here to review the reports for the board, and I go over highlights and answer any questions there may be. And then afterwards, just be looking for if the board's ready to provide directions on next steps in moving the process forward.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, members of the board. Again, my name is Matt Stark. I'm a senior analyst with Baker Tilly, and I did most of the data-based work on this particular study. Won't take up too much of your time tonight. In a broad sense, we just want to talk about the nature of the project and how we actually did the work. So, the idea here was to develop a system for recovering fire and EMS costs for the village, basically allocating those costs based on the proportion of calls that come to different property types. The idea there is that fees could be a potential revenue alternative to using general fund revenues. Starting from the top, we were looking at estimated costs from the city for providing these services, and the estimate that we got was just shy of 2.2 million. We've got some dedicated revenues that can come out of that will offset those costs for ambulance reimbursements, fire inspection charges, and the fire insurance tax. So that left us with 1.77 million was the magic number there. To do the actual allocation, we reviewed incident data from 2020, 21, and 22, which amounted to 2,585 calls for service. Some of those we couldn't really use for allocations. Some of them were false alarms and canceled calls. Some of them were calls in the right-of-way where we couldn't really assign them to any particular property. So we pulled those out, and for our allocations, we were left with 2,330 calls, which is about 81.5% of the original number. Looking at where those calls happened, we went through every one of those incident records to pull the address for it, and those were assigned to one of either 3 residential classes or 2 non-residential classes. So we had single-family and duplex properties, multifamily properties, which is essentially apartment buildings, and then senior living, which was care facilities, 55 years and up communities, that sort of classification. And then on the non-residential side, we had commercial industrial properties, and then separately we had institutional properties. And on the institutional side, we were looking at schools, churches, government buildings, items of that nature.
Matt, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
In regard to the commercial industrial piece.
Yes.
There was no way, so essentially what we're doing, we're taking 150,000 square foot Walmart or Costco with thousands of people in it every day and grouping it with a like-size industrial facility that might have 200 people in it. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming there was no way you could was there a way that you could measure the difference between the number of fire or EMS calls, or were they essentially the same?
I'd have to dig into the numbers again and look carefully at what was falling where. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the differences were in the rates there. Yeah, I will follow up with Scott and with you so we can nail that down.
Yeah, just there's I just have a concern that grouping those two together, just because and I don't want to say convenience, because of the size of building. Right. But there's completely different
well, sure, yeah,
concerns,
levels of foot traffic and numbers of people per 1,000 square feet and that kind of, yes. Okay. I understand. I'm afraid I don't have that level of detail in my notes here. With that in mind then, we looked at the breakout of where the calls for service came from based on these different property classifications. So we had about a quarter of calls came from single-family homes and another quarter from multifamily homes. 32%, so just shy of a third, came from the senior living properties. And then on the commercial industrial was 14% and institutional was 5%. So about a fifth between those two. Looking at the single-family and duplex properties, this was our starting point where we were going to define kind of how we wanted to sort this out. So if the cost recovery target was just shy of 1.77 million and we had 24% of our calls were to single-family duplex properties, then the total recovery from that class would be just shy of $430,000. We had 1,800, just a little over 1,800 housing units in the class, and so the division there works out to be $237 per unit. So that would be for a single-family home or for half of a duplex. And then we're calling that the emergency service equivalent, so the ESE, which you'll see through the remainder of the report. So we have our little table here at the top where we see how many parcels and units we've got for these different categories and how that breaks out in terms of ESEs. Looking at the multifamily homes, again, that was about a quarter of the overall costs, but there are fewer of those properties. So when you look at the proportional amounts, it comes out to about 1.85 ESEs, or essentially 85% more calls proportionally than single-family homes.
Can I just ask, multifamily, that's 3 families up to how many?
What's the biggest apartment
So
building we have here in the village?
that helps answer the question. So all the way up to our largest apartment community.
Right, so it's, I don't know that I saw a lot of 3-unit buildings, but there were some fourplexes and a lot of kind of 8-unit buildings
Gotcha.
in there.
Larger than a duplex and all the way up
Yep.
to the largest.
All the way up to a full-size apartment building. And so, yeah, and that would be per unit in those buildings, not per property. Yeah, which is up there where you can see the difference between number of parcels and number of units. On the senior living, the multiplier there was 4.75. Those properties draw a much higher proportion of calls compared to the number of units that are involved. Looking at each of those multipliers, you can see on the right-hand side of that table, we're getting within about 98% of the target for each of those classes. So we're trying to be careful that we don't over-collect from any particular class. And so these numbers get us pretty close.
So just to confirm, for senior living, each one of the units would be charged the $237 fee.
On senior living, they would actually be charged 4.75 ESEs for each unit. So it would be, quick math, 11.25, I think.
Someone check that. That's scary. If you can do that in your head, I mean. That's the part I'm concerned about.
Sorry. So yeah, that would be the higher number basically to cover the higher proportion of costs that are driven to those properties in that class.
Could you do an example since we're on that? So let's say a facility has 50 potential units in it within the property. So would it be 50 times the 475 times the $237? Is that how that's calculated, or?
Yes. So looking at so if we look at the senior living line up here, the share of the total fire and EMS costs that were going to these properties, was 32% of the overall number, which came out to about $560,000. And so, yes, if you've got somebody that's got 50 units in it, it would be the 1125 for each of those units.
Okay.
Does
and again, that
occupancy
was-
come? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Does occupancy come into play then? So they have 50 units, 39 of them are occupied.
If there were vacancies there, I think that's something that the village would have to talk about as far as how those were going to be allocated. If it was a short-term vacancy, I don't know that the administration would be worth trying to keep track of. If it was something that was going to be vacant for quite some time, then you might look at exempting that unit. I didn't get into that level of detail as far as the administration of the plan. I think that's something that Scott will be going over if this is something that the village decides to pursue.
If I can just interject, there's most likely will be an appeal procedure, just as you have with your transportation utility, so that if there's situations where the owner of the property believes there's an anomaly that would justify some reduction in their assessment, I'm sure we will have a process to allow them to raise that issue.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Scott, have you figured out what, well, rolling back tax rate to 2013? Is that correct?
Right.
Do we know how much a unit will be getting in ESE as far as savings off of the current rate yet?
I took a rough look at a single-family home, and again, currently it's based on property value, so looking at an equalized tax rates, using the current draft tax levy, the current budget, we'd be looking at about the $273 savings on the equalized tax rate for a $300,000 home by going to the fee versus firing us on the tax levy. And that number is going to be a little bit higher on an assessed value, but we don't have the assessment ratio yet. We'll get that until probably November.
All right. Moving on to the non-residential classes, we had about 3.1 million square feet of commercial industrial space and about 1.4 million on the institutional side. Looking at the share of costs for each of those classes, we basically calculated that one ESE per 3,300 square feet for commercial industrial and one ESE per 4,500 square feet for the institutional side would be sufficient to recover the targeted revenues from each of those classes. On the commercial industrial side, we're very close. We're within 1%. Institutional, we fall short by about 3.4%, and that's largely a measure of just how many parcels we have to work with and how much square footage there is. Trying to drill down to say it's 4,527 square feet per unit just gets to be unwieldy. So
did you figure out how much it would be for the Pewaukee schools and for WCTC specifically?
I'd have to look at their square footage real quick.
We've not got any specific property analysis to this point.
I'm sure that'll be a question that comes up quickly, as well as for our own buildings like the library.
And then, so then, non-residential, that would include parks then also?
Parks, I don't believe we were including as part of the allocation. We had we had a few calls that were going to open space. That was part of the set of calls that we pulled out when we were looking at what could be allocated.
Okay, and that would include, there are some 2 or 3 season buildings in the parks, for instance, Kiwanis Village Park.
I would have to look at the actual address and see how we had that coded.
Okay.
That's another thing that I can do with following up with Scott. Looking at the incident reports, if it was coded to basically a street or an open area, we were pulling it out because it couldn't easily be pinned to an address. If there were a few in there that can be pinned to an address, we can reassign those. It's not going to move the needle very much because I imagine there's only a handful of these properties that we would be moving. So,
and I assume that county lands are also included in that then?
County lands are, but I don't believe that the structures on the property.
Yeah, okay.
We can just go back.
Certainly.
So how was the 3,300 and the 4,500 square feet, I mean, how did we come up with that as the benchmark?
Looking at the number of properties that we had and the square footage of each, and the math gets a little interesting in here just because we've got fractions, we'll get up to if you've got, if you're a 20,000 square foot building, you'll have a certain number of ESEs that gets you up to about 19,000, and then you'll get one extra ESE for the leftover. So if you're doing the math based on some of the square footage that's up there, we actually have more ESEs than you would get from the division, and that's due to these fractions that are left over. essentially, we were looking at if we, 1,034 ESEs is about the right number at $237 each for recovering that chunk of money, the $245,000 that was allocated to that property class. So we were looking at, okay, if we need 1,030 odd ESEs to do that recovery, what does that work out to in terms of square footage? And so working in chunks where we had some leftovers that basically gave us some additional ESEs for some properties. That was essentially how we backed into that number. If we know how much one ESE is going to recover, then we know how many we need to recover from that class. And so then we looked at the square footage analysis to figure out what the number should be to get to that number of ESEs. And it was the same on the institutional side. Just they had a lower number of calls proportionally, so they've got a larger chunk of square footage for one ESE.
When I see this, I am really curious about what Bob brought up about the commercial versus industrial. Seems like there would be a big difference.
That's something that I can explore with Scott if we wanted to dig into that level of detail. We have the parcel list. It's just a matter of kind of coming up with some new assignments and seeing how that works out in terms of ESEs for everybody. So this is just kind of a summary of what I was just going over. In that table, you can see then what was the target for each class, how much would be recovered under this ESE assignment, and then what the difference is. And so you can see we get pretty close on each of these. Multifamily and senior living, we come up a little bit short, but to try and break that out differently with different multiples was just going to be kind of an administrative headache. All told, we come at where we collect just about $25,000 shy of what the complete target is. And again, this is done with an eye toward not over collecting to where we would get in trouble for overcharging anybody. Looking at next steps, in addition to some of these details that we were just talking about in this meeting, again, the ESEs are designed to allocate costs based on the level of service demand in each one of these classes. We had the estimated number from the city as far as costs go, and I imagine that's going to be refined in the future. And then, of course, in future years, it'll be a different number. So we'll recalculate what the ESE amount should be. And then to the extent that we see trends in service demand, you'll want to look at making sure that your allocation percentages are correct. If you see that a trend is going more toward, well, like we were just saying, toward commercial properties, then you'll have to do a rebalancing. And I believe that brings us to the end.
Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint sent to us? Thanks.
Certainly.
Any questions, comments?
I'll make a comment. I look at this and I understand the thought and analysis that went through this, and for the most part makes sense. I think what's going to be important as we go forward is understanding the other moving pieces as far as savings on the when we go back to 2013, so that people have businesses have a clear understanding of the true effect to the bottom line going forward. There's going to be some questions that have to be answered, but I think overall the methodology, it makes sense to me, the direction you're going. Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, thank you. And I can assure you the tools, the analytical tools that we've been using to do this, we can come up with some of these, the answers to some of your questions about commercial versus industrial and so things of that nature. It should not take long.
I think that would be pretty interesting to see that in the pie chart there.
Sure.
I would echo what Bob says in that I thought it was really well done. I like the fact that it's very objective, so that helps us make it defendable in terms of usage. I know you have in the 24 budget package, you have something like a new account set up for these, so it's still all going to flow through the general fund, correct? But we're dedicating some of the different sources of revenue, including the fee, kind of segregating that out, and then the expenses come out the same way, correct?
Yeah, we're calling out the different sources, and actually, when we get to the general fund, I'll highlight the couple changes that I needed to make with the refinement to count the 2% dues as well as the fire inspection fees towards the expenses for fire EMS. But yes, those would, again, within the ballpark of that 25,000 or number, we'd be able to quantify what the expense is and what the revenue sources are within the general fund budget to cover that expense.
Yeah. Okay. And the one thing too, I think we need to be prepared to do, based on the feedback sessions I had as we're going through the strategic planning, is we need to do a much better job at communicating to the community what this is, how it works, why it's in their best interest, and so forth. One thing I took away, and when we get to it at the end of the session, is the comparable one being the transportation utility is what a lot of misunderstanding about what it is and why it was done and how it works and everything else. And this is such a dramatic change from how we fund fire and rescue from the past. We need to really take, I think, a cue from the school district and put together a communication plan, and we need to sell it because it's a positive thing. And, you know, I just want to make sure we don't make the same mistake we did before by assuming people are going to, you know, watch the show, the TV episode, or read the minutes or anything else because it doesn't tell the story. So I think as we move forward on this thing, that has to be part of our conversation as well.
I agree.
Well, yeah, you know that I'm fully on board with creating new communication channels that actually push our information, both the negatives and the positives, out more effectively to the community.
So I just want to make sure that as we move this forward, that we're building that into our thought process as well. So, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
Item 8B, discussion and direction regarding the request from the city of Pewaukee for the intersection improvements of State Highway 164 and Lindsay Road.
Okay, we have with us Maggie Wagner and Scott Klein from the city. And as noted in my cover memo, Maggie's here to discuss the possible partnership with the village in some form or manner to possibly move towards traffic signals at the intersection of Lindsay and 164. So, Maggie?
Thank you. So this came to our attention as part of a improvement project that the Wisconsin DOT is doing on 164. They're doing a resurfacing project, which I believe is slated for construction in 2026. As part of the stakeholders meetings that we engineers are invited to for those improvement projects, the discussion was brought up about that intersection, and we at the city get complaints at that intersection of feeling unsafe making that crossing when you're trying to either go straight across or trying to do a left-hand turn through that intersection. And so unfortunately, Dan Mays was not at that initial meeting, but in because of our citizens' concerns or things that we've heard, we asked the DOT about that intersection. And they came back to us at the follow-up meeting and said that that intersection did not meet the warrants to put signals at this time as part of this project, because this project is just a resurfacing project, really. So it does meet a warrant to have signals, and that's really because of the queuing that occurs during peak rush hour traffic. So that is the one warrant that intersection did meet. But unfortunately, that's not enough to get signals as part of this project. So the discussion that we had with the DOT was, what are our options? You know, are we able to install signals at this intersection? And they said that they would install signals at the intersection at 100% cost of the local municipality, if we wanted to pursue it as part of this project. So that's when I reached out to Dan and started the discussion, and I believe that Scott was brought into that discussion as well, about whether we as a community want to move forward with installing signals at that intersection. So tonight I'm here to have that discussion with you to determine whether you would like to partner with the city to be able to install lights at this intersection as part of this project. In my opinion, I think this is the opportunity to do it. I think this is probably the lowest cost that we will see to install signals at this intersection. And given the growth in north of us, in Sussex and Lisbon, and the increased traffic that's on 164, I think that this problem is only going to continue to grow at this intersection. The next time that the DOT is probably going to be coming through this area is probably in 20, maybe 30 years. You know, so now I believe is the opportunity that we have to get a safer intersection at that location. So that is my request. Scott, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think one thing that has to be known is that the city obviously can't act on this unilaterally because all four corners of the intersection are within the village of Pewaukee. We recognize that it affects the citizens of both communities, so that's why we're here tonight to discuss this. The Common Council expressed interest in putting signals in to make it safer, but because of, again, not being able to make the decision on our own, we had to approach you and then see if you agree that they're necessary, and then would come to some sort of partnership to make that happen.
So I have two questions for you. So are you proposing that you pay for half and we pay for half, so 150 grand for each municipality?
I don't think at this time we're proposing what the split might be.
Okay.
We're trying to see if there's interest on the village's part to pursue it, and then, like all of these things, we talk about who pays what.
Okay. And then why a traffic signal and not a roundabout?
So I can speak to that. So the a roundabout in this location wouldn't necessarily work because of the difference in the volume of traffic. So there's a large volume of traffic on 164 and not a lot on Lindsay Road. So a traffic roundabout in this location would not be beneficial and would not be something that is an effective use of a roundabout.
That would also take, they're talking about a resurfacing project here for the state highway. And so a roundabout would be a whole big project now, tearing up the whole intersection, building the roundabout. So that isn't in the state cost. So I don't know if they come back and ask again for cost sharing on that, because they didn't plan on it. That's possible. But that would be a whole lot more expensive.
Maggie, you asked some questions of the DOT in regard to when the data was from. I think they said 2021.
Correct.
Have we exhausted everything we could? Obviously, there's been a lot of growth in the last couple of years out in that area. Have we exhausted every appeal we could to the state in regard to helping out with this?
Yes. So we've had one of our committee members, our highway committee members, actually pursuing this through county perspective and trying to go that route unsuccessfully. And he's actually had some conversations with the state. That would be Mr. Swan. He they have held firm that, it doesn't meet the warrants to qualify as part of a resurfacing project. That's not to say in 20 years when they come back and do something else that it doesn't meet at that time, but right now, they're holding firm to the fact that it does not meet the warrants in a resurfacing project.
Sorry, when you say when they come back around in 20 years, would there not be cause, given the substantial growth in that area between 2021 and 2023, and what we're seeing even moving forward with regard to additional subdivisions and traffic in that area, would there not be cause for them to do a new study?
They will do a study when they come back with another project, but it's probably going to be 20 years out when they do this, because they're looking at same thing as what the village does and the city does when we're looking at reconstructing a roadways. We're looking to get a minimum 20-year life out of that roadway.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't anticipate that them coming back through with another project on 164 for probably another 20 years.
So they don't do studies based on concerns of residents or based on safety issues present in the area?
If there's a large volume, a large increase, they would, potentially, and if it was asked of them, they may perform that study. But it's not something they'll automatically do unless they have an upcoming project.
Yeah, so I think getting at what Bob might have been bringing forward, is there going to be an opportunity for us to ask in 2 years when the new construction is complete in the Swan Farms area and we can see the impact that it has on Lindsay Road, or when we have kind of a sense of how the volume is going to be increasing?
You can ask, but at that time, that project would definitely be 100% funded by the city, and I think it would be more expensive than the $300,000 that we'd be responsible for today, because it would be a standalone project. It wouldn't be part of a larger project that they're already completing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, that's helpful.
So when I look at this, again, as was stated, the intersection is essentially village. And anybody who has been on that intersection during
mean
prime time.
Us several times a day?
It's,
'Cause we both live
it's,
there. Yeah.
it's accidents waiting to happen. Okay, it needs to be addressed. I think we'd be foolish not to look at a partnership with the city. An amount or the effort required to be determined, but we're talking about our community citizens' lives here.
I don't think you're going to get argument, well, I can't speak for Craig, but I use that intersection multiple times a day, and my daughter, who's a new driver, doesn't use it at all because I've told her she can't use it because it's dangerous. People don't know how to navigate the turns. It's treacherous even for me as an experienced driver, so I agree that it's a problem.
So it sounds like we have 4 supporting.
Well, yeah, I'm really on the fence. I mean, like Chris said, I mean, I take it all the time. I get to get here. And during the rush hour time, you're right, it's pretty bad. Any other time, it's not a big deal. So I really kind of weigh that. The other part, though, is when you think about trying to drive up 164, let's say from Capitol, you got the intersection at Capitol with the lights, and then you have one at Swan, and then you have one at Costco, and if you have one more another mile down the road, and they're not timed. They are never timed. So you literally can be hitting, to go 2 miles, it takes you 15 minutes just to go that short stretch. So I think if there is any further consideration, how the traffic flows during that section also needs to be considered. I mean, I had the same thought, a roundabout, because there are more as you go up on 164, there's several of them. Yeah. And when you know them, they work pretty slick. And in that way, there's never a backup. People are just constantly moving. I mean, if the state has no interest in that, as we've experienced before, the state has no interest in it. But if it is an option, I think that should be on the table, just because you don't get backups anywhere. Traffic moves. And like I said, the ones that I'm used to, I find them to be very effective.
One last comment, if I could. We've got to keep in mind, we've got to fast forward 5 years or 10 years. No more farmers fields. You've got subdivisions all over the place. You've got a fully active sports complex with tons of people during the summer. It's not going to get better. It's something that needs to be addressed. It makes sense to do it when the reconstruction, repaving is taking place. We just got to work out the specifics between the two of us.
Can I ask a question? So did the DOT tell you when they would need to have an MOU in place for the communities to participate in this funding?
They said that they would like an agreement by the end of summer. We're kind of
23?
So we're trying to move this forward as quickly as we can at this point.
All right.
One of the things I think, what I'm gathering is that the interest is there. We just have to work out the details. And so, I would, knowing that you currently don't have a director of public works, I don't have a problem taking the lead on it and having that conversation with the DOT saying, hey, we are interested in this. What would your agreement look like, and kind of start the ball rolling on their end as we're kind of working through the details on our end.
So do you know, is there any right-of-way that will have to be acquired in order to construct these, something of that nature?
I don't believe so for the signals. If you were talking about a roundabout, I think there would
Of
be
course,
significant.
that's the big difference in the cost between them.
Anything else? Do you have sufficient feedback from us, or do we not help at all?
Oh, I believe so. So, what I'm going to take forward is I will contact the DOT, let them know that we do have that interest, and to start working on that MOU on their end. And then at the same time, we'll work on, coming up with a proposal for the cost share, or how that would work out for a memo between the city and the village regarding the project. And then we'll bring that forward to our council as well as this board for consideration.
I think
Oh,
that's-
good, more negotiations.
Yay.
And that was going to be the point I was going to make, is that unfortunately, some of the parties that are generating the additional traffic are not going to be at that table. And yet, our two communities are participating in the costs to address their needs, which is, speaks to why the county and the state should have been, taking more of a leadership role, because this is not all about the city. It's not all about the village. It's the region. And unfortunately, we're going to be footing the cost to deal with the region's problem. So I know you know that, but hopefully when you have that communication, you can say that was part of the village's feedback. Assuming you all agree.
I agree, and I hope if there's a reporter listening, they quote that.
We run into that same issue on Highway F.
It's all over the region.
They want us to pay for the whole.
Right.
The only intersection worse than 164, Lindsay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Let's see, the agenda. Item 8C, discussion review of the budget for 2024 regarding general fund administration and park and rec. Do you want to do park and rec first?
Good evening. So as like years past, what I generally do is follow my narrative pretty verbatim, just so that we can cover section by section and certainly answer any questions that the board may have in the different areas. But just generally as highlights, we always try to assemble this, even though it's sometimes a challenge at this date, as a worst case scenario. Our current agreement sits at 72% city responsibility, 28% village responsibility in terms of both expenses and revenues. We, excuse me, something that has had questions before, rental of parks, those revenues stay with the municipality where the park is located. In terms of additional revenues, we have taken previous feedback from the Parks and Recreation Board on opportunities where we may be able to get local businesses involved in sponsorships. And you see some of those listed out for t-shirts or movies in the park, things like that. We've also had a really strong partnership with Beachside Boat and Bait to make some of those ventures more advantageous or streamline the processes a little bit to find efficiencies. When we look at our growth from specifically the Parks and Recreation Department since 2018, so about 5 years now, our non-taxable, so in Parks and Recreation or the recreation side, programs are really viewed two ways. You have instructional programs, which are not taxable, and then you have non-instructional programs, which are taxable. Those are important because that's what leads us to our revenue and what we pay taxes on. But when you take all of our programs, plus our field trips, which include cooperative efforts with Sussex or Menominee Falls, but also our field trips from our summer day camp program, those revenues have grown from $222,000 in 2018 to a projected $407,500 in 2024. So with this continued growth, we are proposing to add a full-time recreation coordinator for 2024 with their salary and benefits to be completely offset by revenue growth next year. We've had a really strong registration revenue-wise in 2023, and we're projecting more growth in 2024. And we'll continue offering more programs and then increase program fees accordingly with the programs as we see fit. In terms of the highlights, before we start breaking down to separate areas, do you all have any questions on that portion? Seeing none. So overall, I provided a chart or table that shows revenues and operational expenses on both the parks and recreation side. So you see the first column being the 2023 budget, and then the second column being the village portion of that budget, so 28%. Then you see the 2024 proposal in column 3, and column 4 being the village portion again there. Comparing the net change 2023 to 2024, we have an increase of 6.27%. Using that formula, we're still at that 28%. We haven't received final population numbers, which are part of the formula. So as that comes in, I believe it's in early to mid-November, we will update that formula and then let the village and city know accordingly. Overall, the increases, some of the highlight areas of where the budget increases come on the expense side would be health insurance. For the city, we currently have Humana insurance, and Humana is leaving the market, so we will be joining the state plan. While the state plan may be advantageous, initially it is not. They charge a significant surcharge to join their plan. So that is something that will exist year 1, 2024. It's roughly half year 2, 2025, and then becomes non-existent in year 3, 2026. So that is very significant for us. We don't have final numbers, so while the village got final numbers or returning plans to the state plan did, we are still a new applicant, so we don't have final numbers regarding insurance yet. Wages have not been finalized for our pay for performance program. However, those numbers would likely change as a reduction at this point, not an increase. And then we are bringing on a new person or proposing to. So that is obviously a significant increase to something that didn't exist currently. And then as we have numbers start to finalize, we will certainly share those with the village so we're consistently having updates and providing you with those. Any questions on that section?
So the surcharge for getting back onto the state plan, is that factored into what you described as the worst case scenario, or was the worst case scenario assuming Aurora?
No, Humana, but and so we're not coming back on the state plan, or at least in my 5 years, we haven't been. But it is included in this.
Okay.
So it would be something next year we would see a decrease in that specific area.
So again, Nick, in the worst case scenario, things won't go higher. And
Correct.
there's a likelihood that things would decline as far as.
I would like to see some declines,
Okay.
specifically
All right.
that insurance area, but that's obviously
Okay.
one we have no control over.
Okay.
Looking at shared capital equipment, we've kind of got to a smoothing area now where we have consistent dollar amounts instead of really trying to massage those to make it more palatable. We've finally gotten there. And then you see the listed items there that are department purchases. 6 of those are replacement items, and then the one new item is a forklift, which we were previously using the city DPW's forklift to accept deliveries, but they are no longer located at that site. So where we accept deliveries, we don't have a forklift, so we would be purchasing a new to us forklift, so used.
But it's a used one.
Correct.
Yep.
Or I should say, the city bills the village for the purchase of new equipment, so the village responsibility of those 7 items would be that $57,820 for 2024. Village capital equipment, so we have the Village Park Improvement Fund that we utilize to replace capital items at village parks. We had a familiar conversation about a month ago on this. We are expecting to have approximately $30,000 remaining in that account at the end of 2023. This fund receives additional dollars if the Parks and Recreation Department comes in under budget on expenses only, and the fund is not finalized until approximately March of the following year after the audit. So of our total budget, recreation and parks, what we come in under budget, then you take 28% of that is how we grow this fund. We generally budget as though we're going to spend 100% of costs. That's, we don't try to inflate it by any means, but hopefully we come in under budget. But obviously you can see that can be a challenge at that 28% to grow this fund to replace large capital items.
How long has that formula or that methodology been in place?
That has been,
Since the dawn of time?
yeah, I think so, yeah.
It just strikes me as an odd way to do it.
I don't know that that is true. I thought that was a John Lehman really pushed when he was on the board, is my understanding.
But
I don't know that it existed before.
That's part of the joint park and rec ordinance in the village code, and the village code still references town versus city, so it predates 1999.
Because, you could have it where you are not under budget, that you're right on your numbers, and that means there's no funding for any park improvements. I don't know, that just strikes me as an odd way of doing it. I'm not saying I can change it, with a conversation here, but.
And the looking at the using of that unspent funds was something that was created 10 or so years ago, I think, just as a way to help put something into place to fund the replacement of park equipment, because otherwise it was battling for borrowed funds.
Yeah, we put that into order when we got Lehman Park. I think it was right around that time.
And that's what I was referring. I think around 2014 was the time where this was created, because I think capital projects at parks were previously brought forward for the use of borrowed funds or general fund dollars to fund those improvements. So this was put in place to start creating a fund, but obviously you can see it's a challenge to fully fund the projects, and we received some assistance with the infrastructure fund for the project at Kiwanis Village Park right now, but it certainly can be challenging to keep up with capital projects.
Obviously for 2024, it's not a subject, for us to delve into, but I guess I would say that's one of those things that maybe we need to look at and say, just because we've always done it that way, doesn't mean it has to continue that way. So, anyway, just a thought.
And so generally, without knowing what the final numbers are, it's obviously challenging to not have a final number, to not have a firm quote as to exactly what we'll be replacing or the numbers that may change. What I generally try to do is, for the last 2 years, I've proposed or given a list of potential projects with the idea that we may spend the fund down to, say, $10,000, keep an emergency buffer in there, but know that these are some of the items that are on our radar as to things we'd like to accomplish. Should the funding be there? Should the 30,000 grow to 40 or 50,000 by chance? We have a list, something to work off of, and then we would bring it back before you all before completion.
Where are you thinking for dog park?
So we aren't firm on that idea. One of the things we've been looking into is a rotating dog park where you have the materials, the fencing, the entrance, things like that, and it utilizes different parks. And one of the reasons we're looking into that is none of the current parks in the city or the village provide the necessary space to run an effective dog park.
Previously, we had been looking at doing that with Balmer, hadn't we?
We had. So generally, you should have 5 acres or more. And that's really a challenge at any of our parks. The larger city parks, most of the space is allocated towards tennis, baseball, soccer, pavilions, things like that. Similarly with Village Park, with the exception of what used to be PAA, the back diamond that would stay really wet. That's one of the things that makes that area challenging for the spring and early summer is it stays very wet. It's not that large. If that would be a year-round dog park, the grass would be gone in the first year and it would never come back. So it's something that we're looking at. Could we find 3-4 different areas to get us through the year, allow those areas, while they're heavily used during that time to recover as we rotate to the next park. So it's something we're still looking into. It's becoming trendy for communities that don't have the necessary space, but we haven't come up with final numbers or how we would get to that finish line yet.
Nick, offhand, do you know of communities that offer that rotating approach?
I don't. Monica is our resident dog expert, and she's really been the one diving into that. So I would have to get those from her, but she's found some good resources and things she's looking into.
I would love to just nose around if she happens to have a couple to look into.
Sure.
It seems to me like some of the dog parks, instead of just like the one at Neshota, it has like a lot of plantings in there and things like that. If we were to do some sort of thing like that with that back area, would that keep it so that we could make that a dog park full-time instead of, because we can't do much with it, but if we did a lot of plantings and things like that?
I don't think it's just the water or how wet it stays. I think just generally grass is going to wear down if there's heavy traffic.
Mm-hmm.
The best estimate we could come up with for Kiwanis Village Park was about 2 acres. And I just don't see that being sufficient for something that's 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Are those things that could help? And the River Partnership has gone a long ways with helping us at Village Park and at Kep Park with native plantings and things that can help clean the river and prevent things from getting in there that shouldn't be, as well as soak up a lot more water. But just in general, I don't think we could get to a full-time park there. Things we've looked additionally, I've talked a little bit about with different groups that have expressed interest, even doing like drain tile and things like that. But I think it's just solely the square footage would pose challenges in terms of grass if you don't give it a rest period.
Okay.
So some of the ideas there, we are looking at both city and village parks to find ways to use more efficient energy or be non-wasteful. We've switched a lot of our hand towels out for electric hand dryers, transitioning to LED lighting, things like that. So those continue to be areas of interest for us. And then just a note, we did complete the new walkway to the relocated and new fishing pier through a community development block grant with a value of almost $13,000 this year. Any questions on capital equipment? Transitioning to Lehman Family Lakeside Park and the fund there. Just general fee structure updates. The tenant rent will increase in April by 3%. Slip rent will increase by $100 in 2024. We have already exceeded revenue, budgeted revenue for 2023 as of the end of August. We were intending to complete the balcony, deck, and rubber roof replacement, tongue twister, up to $90,000 in 2023. We're getting ready to get that out to bid for 2024 now. And then I just wanted to highlight really the only remaining capital projects that we have prior to 2030 are window replacement. It's not necessary yet, but potentially 2025. And then the deck renovation at the green space on the northwest part of the property is part of Lehman Park. So then it would become the responsibility for us to replace. But because of its location and proximity to the water, we are somewhat limited on how we can replace that. And I'm just, for the overall use, I'm just not proposing an immediate replacement of it. I just don't think it's something that's quite utilized by the community as much as I would like to see.
I don't think people realize that they can use it.
Yeah, and we've added some signage, but I would say that's a fair statement. So those are some of the highlights. You do also have the annual budget and the capital budget. One thing I didn't update, so we will want to update with Scott and Kayla. I can send you this. The first account number listed there titled use of fund balance, that is a new line item. We've had some feedback in the past when we have a really large capital project, it has the effect on making our overall budget look like a loss, and it is for that 1 year, but generally you're not funding your large capital projects out of annual cash flow. So that account is essentially exactly what it's titled. It's use of fund balance. We would change that 0 to $35,722. You bring that in, your budget is whole, and you're not showing a loss for the year. So that's really the one change. Generally, we don't have a lot of changes. We're using the same quantities to form the budget numbers, but obviously everything has different prices as the years change. So we still use the same quantity estimate on gas, and that hasn't been inappropriate. Boat launches, we've come in under, but I don't feel so strongly that we need to aggressively change that down, things like that. Excuse me. But really, it's rather consistent on the annual budget in terms of how we operate.
So by incorporating use of fund balance in that, would effectively be showing as a break-even year then for '24?
By using the fund balance, yes, and that it's not $20,000 doesn't always do that, or $3,000 or 0. It just is the number you use to make it whole. So that's how we got there. I don't have any concerns over doing that, knowing where the fund balance sits currently. I think it's very appropriate, and it's our one capital expense that I think we really need to get taken care of. We've been trying to do this project for 2 years.
Okay.
And that really funnels into the last page. I believe it's the last page. Yeah, the last page, which is the capital spreadsheet. Anything that's highlighted there is the purchase year, and that takes us out through 2034. My narrative was through 2030. That feels like kind of on the horizon years, but really even after that is very reasonable. We've taken care of just about everything on that property to get it in a much better state than it was when the village took ownership of it.
Yeah. It's nice to see smaller numbers there.
Yeah. Any questions about anything? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got it? General administration?
Sure, just highlight a couple changes from what was in the budget at the last meeting. We did receive the health insurance numbers from the state of Wisconsin early part of last week, and we're working through those. And what we're looking at is a change in the lowest cost plan for Waukesha County, as well as, which will come in line with other surrounding counties, is Network Health versus Dean. And with that, we're seeing about a 19% increase in premium from single and family. So looking at, today, I worked with Cassie, I ran those numbers through our budget, and what that means from a health insurance, and I'll update these numbers and distribute a new document for the next meeting, is from a health insurance standpoint, we're looking at about a little over a $13,000 add to the budget. But we're also looking at some positive changes to our property tax levy, the allowable levy. I didn't think that the DOR in past years has released the levy limit worksheet as soon as it has, but that did become available in the last week or two. And based on how the percentages, we are able to capture unused levy from prior years and can add a little over $5,900 to the property tax levy.
$5,900?
$5,900. It's not a lot, but when you're looking at levy adjustments, our revenue sources, it helps. Shared revenue, the number I had in there was what came out when Act 12 came through and Department of Revenue distributed the initial estimate for shared revenue. And that number shows $4,035 more than what I had in the budget. We can also capture, there's about an $800 increase in the new shared revenue allocation, or the supplemental shared revenue. On the, as Matt went through earlier, there were two sources of revenue that Baker Tilly identified that should be directed towards fire EMS fee reduction, and that's the 2% dues that we receive from the state of Wisconsin, as well as the fire inspection revenue. So we'd need to decrease the fire EMS fee based on, again, we don't have final numbers, so we're just working off of an estimated cost at this point by just under $120,000. Looking on the interest income, we're looking at a significant amount over budget for this year. And again, when we put the budget together, at least my practice has been budget conservatively, especially on revenues, because you don't know where the market's going, especially when it comes to interest. But $325,000 was the projected revenue for this year. Talking with Kayla yesterday and today, she's comfortable looking at $382,000 for interest revenue. And for next year, also looking at $100,000 increase over what's in the budget, so looking at $175,000 versus $75,000.
I was going to ask you about that,
Yeah.
because where'd that 75 come from when the realities are very different?
Yeah, so again, that's why it's a moving target. Time will tell what the Fed does this week or next week, whenever their next meeting is on rates. But looking at the changes I just reviewed, what it does on a net basis is an estimated $23,000 to the shortfall in the budgets. So we'd be looking at about a $211,000 shortfall for 2024 at this point. We're looking at revenues and expenses between each meeting. Those are the highlights from what was distributed for the last meeting to now, just in terms of, and then any other questions you have on any other part. In terms of building permits, we still have vacant lots at the Glen, and we should have 36 lots available for single-family homes at the old nursing home property. The Westerly is looking at pulling their general building permit this year, so that'll help this year's projected revenue, not next year. But again, projects come in, and again, I've historically been conservative on estimating my revenues and looking at the same philosophy with expenses, because I don't want to get into the situation where overreach on one and then reality doesn't come in that way, and then where do you chop?
So you'll have this documented for the
Yeah, I'll
next
have
meeting?
an updated document in the next meeting packet. Just too many moving pieces coming to the end of last week, and I didn't want to misstate any numbers in a memo that didn't tie to a budget document.
There are enough of us here anyway.
Question I have, based on the projected surplus this year, which means it's going to flow to the infrastructure fund, based on the information that's in here, that means in '24, the infrastructure fund will have something like 1.3 million or something like that in it. I'm just wondering, unless there's some technical reason, thought of moving the purchase of the police vehicle out of general operating and out of the infrastructure fund and free up about $58,000 from that. I don't know if that's not considered okay or
It's like move it out of general fund and have it come,
out of infrastructure.
that's certainly, it's still a cash basis. and-
Right.
And it's
Just-
planned use of that fund balance, which is,
I don't
it's
know.
there to
Anyone
help
have
with that.
thoughts on that? I'm just trying to think of how we shrink the gap in the general
Yeah.
fund.
That makes sense.
And then the other aspect of that too, this year we used ARPA funds for Park and Rec joint equipment. You could look at infrastructure, our ARPA for next year. Looking at what we had used for ARPA funds for last year, planned use for this year, our original allocation was a little over 849,000. If we use all of what we budgeted for this year, we'd have just under 419,000 in ARPA funds that we'll need to allocate by the end of 2014. Don't have to spend them until the end of 26, but the way the federal law is right now on ARPA funds, you have to allocate how you're going to spend those funds by 12/31 of 24, spending them by 12/31 of 26.
I guess it'd be interesting, some thoughts from the board on ARPA. Personally, I don't think we need to go, fortunately, don't need to go through that same exercise in '24. We can perhaps use the ARPA funds for what they were intended to be used for.
Capital projects,
Yeah, because
reducing
we still have
debt.
that list of things like, the HVAC for this building, LED lighting, some of those things that help conserve some costs for use of energy and things like that. Or any of the other ones that are on the list. And so, I would personally rather have us have that conversation to define that rather than try and use those funds. Because I think if we take the car out, now we're looking at 150,000 gap, and just, it seems like horseshoes.
Right, it
It's
moves
usually
that
close
much.
enough. So I don't think we need to do that, but I think it'd be useful to take care of some of those capital expenses with the funds from the feds, rather than have to worry about adding debt or something later down the road.
I agree.
That makes sense.
Well, we can also look at maybe like on some of the police outlay items, advancing those from 24 to 23, given where we're looking at coming in budget-wise. So like the computer server,
That's a great idea.
squad rifle, some of those things, smaller items, if you'd want me to work with the police department to get some firm quotes on those things versus budget estimates, we can, again, we're still getting those accomplished just a year earlier, and
I think that's smart. Well, the dollars are there.
I would think so. You guys would agree? I think we should look at that.
so yeah, that's high level in terms of changes, or certainly any other questions you have versus what originally came out. Be happy to address those as well.
The new format of the report helps a lot. It does.
I almost forgot to do that for Lehman Park, but I remembered.
No, really. But if you could just, because every time I look at this last couple of weeks, we got 6 columns. Budget is what you're proposing for '24, correct? What does projected mean?
Projected year end for this year.
Okay, so this is projected for '23. Then current actuals where we're at.
Correct.
'23. Current budget is the '23 actual budget, and then PY actual, PY.
Prior year, so 22
Oh,
actual,
22.
22 budget.
All right.
So I don't
Just
know
wanna
if
make
we
sure we're getting that
can
right.
change the headings on those.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Just give us a key.
As long as I know. As long as I know. I mean, I was guessing at that, but then when I was looking at the interest stuff, I was like, that doesn't make sense. So that's why. To make sure I understood that. Okay. Any other questions, comments, topics on the budget? All right. Item 8D, possible action on Class B alcohol license for Mix Bar located at 145 West Wisconsin Avenue, Unit 3. Scott, is that you? Cassie, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Today Kansas is here. She owns the Mix and Bar. It's a kind of, they mix scents there and have a little boutique. And they went before the Plan Commission last week, I think it was, and they were granted their approval for offering alcohol, and now it's up to you to grant their license if you'd like to. They would just be asking to serve beer there. There's no underage, well, under 21, nobody's allowed unless they're with their parent or guardian, I think, right? Yeah. So that's kind of the overview. Do you have questions?
I'll make a motion to approve the Class B alcohol license for Mix and Bar.
Second, Gergen.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. You got to sit for an hour and a half.
It was worth the wait.
Everything else, just for that.
They could use it as
Call me
Class B.
tomorrow.
Yes.
I'll get this printed so you guys. Okay. Yeah.
All right, can we want to take care of the checks first and then bounce back to the, okay, so next is check report for August of 2023. Anyone have questions on that? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve everything but the library, checks related to the library.
Motion by Rhodey.
Second, Gergen.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and then for the checks related to the library fund, I'm looking for an acknowledgement there.
Motion to acknowledge the library checks.
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so that's taken care of. All right, so let's jump back then to the old business, 7A, regarding strategic plan update for the environmental scanning of focus groups. It was in your packet. You also got a separate, just because lengthier documents, personal peeve to have things rolled in with a very long document. So anyway, couple of things. One is if there's any questions on it or any comments or any thoughts of what we haven't covered, what we should be covering, I'll take feedback either here or separately if you want to do that. You just pass that on. So anything at top of anyone's head of what we need to take care of?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for doing such a great job with this. It was fantastic that you updated both of these and took this project on. So thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the thoughtful expansion of groups that you discussed this information with. I think that was really beneficial as well.
Yeah. The feedback sessions were very interesting in that, in a number of ways. Some things that were prominent 4 years ago were non-existent now.
And you didn't bring them up?
Oh, no, as hard as it was, I tried not to give my opinion. So, but the other thing is there was a lot of consistency between the groups, and I really wasn't expecting that. The last page of the second section, which got into some insights, were me trying to read between the lines on some of those things. And again, I think the one huge thing is communications. And so I think that's something we'll have to address. So anyway, like I said, I think they were useful. I was a little disappointed in some of the participation, especially among the business groups. But then again, all you can do is ask people to participate, and if they choose not to, well, not much we can do. But again, that's just an example of concern there. I think the decision, though, and that's why I just passed out this document, is we can, in order to start building out the plan, we can make one of two choices. We can either say, well, let's do the one last leg of the feedback, which is doing a survey to the community, and it's residentially focused, and do that yet, and then once we have that, build that into all this other information, and then start the planning. Or if we feel that what you have in front of you, plus just our experiences, I mean, this time we didn't interview the board because we'll have our input anyway, whether we want to go one way or the other, and I'm okay either direction. But if we do a survey, there will be some costs. And the thought process I had in mind with it, again, a little different from before, is that, first of all, we would need to get the list from the voter registrations, which is fairly inexpensive. I mean,
Why wouldn't we just do every door direct?
Good, I suppose, if we can narrow it down so it's village only.
Yeah, you totally can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be more cost efficient and
Certainly more postage, I know.
it would cast a wider net.
And sorry, is that a mailer that directs people to an online survey tool?
Right, we would have to do that. But then in doing that, it would be only a mailer. Part of the thought I had was in getting the list, we can append emails, and then we could do both mailing and emails to try and get to folks. But
Some of us might have the list from 2023.
Yeah.
well, it's probably outdated. Those decay pretty quickly. But again, if we want to do that and not do email, that's fine. That's a decision we can certainly make. I know from a postage standpoint, it's a severe discount, so that helps from a cost. And then we can also use some of the various social pages we know that are out there, like the one that Jim does. Lake Park has its own. I mean, I'm sure the Oaks probably has. I mean, there's different social media outlets that we can have things posted on to drive village residents to a website, but we also need the survey platform, and those are pretty cheap, a couple $100 for a year.
And once we do that, we can capture the village email addresses as a part of it.
Great idea.
If they want to provide it, but I think if they're providing feedback, they need to provide a village address for the feedback, because we're looking for feedback.
I was thinking email address.
Well, I wanted both.
Absolutely. The more, yeah, if we can get that,
We
that's
make it
gonna
optional, because if people feel like they have to be identified, they may not want to give us feedback. That's the whole idea of a survey is.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but at the same time, I think that we do need to capture some of that information, because here we've been talking repeatedly about doing a communications plan and having the information about our residents and the people who this information matters to. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be anonymous. I think that people can take ownership of their responses.
We can make that choice, just we have to realize we'll have some suppression of response rates.
Do we know what the response rate was last time we did this?
It was fairly high.
published. It
We were
was.
pleasantly surprised
was-
at how high it was.
It was
good-
very high.
good
What's high?
Well, based on what the consultants said, they thought it was unusually good based on their experience.
High for a response rate, but in terms of percentage of our actual population,
It won't knock your socks off.
we
It
never
seems to me it was 3 times higher than the normal rate that they've seen in other similar sized
It was in the hundreds, and not that numbers stick in my head, but I think it was like 300 some respondents.
And we didn't even do a social media campaign or
No, it was just
anything
a
with it.
mailer, I think. and that was-
To address the question, I think, that we're all sort of getting at, it seems like there is consensus that we need to do that level of outreach, that to do our due diligence, we need to be contacting the residents, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And do we want to take the route of like a every door direct mail, that approach, which means we don't buy a list, we don't get emails appended, we don't do any of that front end work, we just simply mail it out, direct them to a URL with the survey on it and leave it at that?
Absolutely.
I like that idea because it also is going to get access to people who potentially haven't been showing up at the polls to vote.
Yeah.
For you, Craig. I don't know why they wouldn't.
That number shrinks every time. I just don't understand it. Okay, all right. No, that's fine. So I guess the question is, and again, that changes on here, obviously, some of the cost factors involved. Are we okay in making the expense? Because obviously it's not a budgeted item. That's why I brought it forward and clearly it's not a huge amount of money.
We can't use ARPA funds for this, can we? This year?
Not trying to ARPA, but we have sufficient projected fund balances.
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with it.
We need to hear from the residents.
And I would be happy to work with the postcard design and
Do
putting that
either one of you
together.
know somebody that can do design work, either like very cheap or free?
I might.
Let me
All right.
pull up the
I didn't
Canvas
factor that
site.
in, but I figured we'd find volunteers somewhere. And again, we're not looking for high art, we just need to get the information out there. But, all right, let me rework this information based on this feedback, and we'll start going ahead. And again, I'll lean on you guys to help as we frame the survey. Because, I want to take some of the information from the last one. I think it's still valid, but based on things that we've learned last few months, I want to incorporate that in as well.
I do want to mention also, Craig, as Heather did, thank you for doing this. Anybody who's involved with doing SWOT analysis, I've
It's
done
not
enough.
glamorous
I don't
work.
even want to do them again. But I do really appreciate the
It's
effort and the
valuable.
time that you put into this. Did a great job.
And the fact that you keep pushing on it and keep going is fantastic and appreciated.
When you do that for your whole career, it kind of becomes second nature. So, but no, I mean, quite honestly, I think we've all seen the value of the strategic plan, and I know the staff's appreciated in terms of having consistent direction, regardless of who's on the board. So, to me, I think it's just very important for us to continue doing that. So, all right.
Yeah.
Anything else in terms of updates that we need to talk about?
As far as questions go, are you going to have a conversation with
Yes. I mean, I'll start framing it up, but then I'll share and get input. We'll come up with a questionnaire, and bring it back to the board, basically, for kind of final review, if that's appropriate.
Do we want to set up a timeline for when we would like to have the mailer go out, just so we kind of put that on our calendars as a goal?
I think we want to be pretty aggressive because, once again, once we get that information back, we still have to build out the plan, and I think it'd be very nice if we can have that done either late this year, early next year, before the first quarter.
I agree.
So let me throw a timeline together.
Okay.
One thing I think you want to consider, though, do you want it lost among all the holiday things that are going on? Because it will get lost.
Yep. No.
Are you better off doing something the first part of the year? Don't know. It
Unless-
depends on what your end date, what, you know.
Right, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, if we can realistically get something out there early November, we avoid a lot of that.
We can also put the QR code for it on the tax bill mailing.
Yeah, we can put it on our, well, I don't know, it won't be ready, I guess, before our next utility billing.
That's a shame, because people read it, the whole thing, both sides.
Do you think so?
I'm being facetious, thinking we need to push communication differently. Sorry.
Yeah, let's just put that thought through in terms of different channels we can use.
Yes.
So, all right,
Any way we can get that information.
absolutely. Multi. All right, I think we beat that one. All right, I think we've come to item 9, citizen comments. Again, opportunity for citizens to share their opinion with board members on any topic they choose. With Wisconsin open meeting laws, the board is not able to answer questions or respond to comments. Respond to your comments. All comments should be directed to the board. Limit of 3 minutes per speaker. Speakers are again asked to use the podium, state their name and address. Is there anybody here that wants to make a comment tonight? Yes.
Jody Canning-Drina, 689 Laureate Court. I just want to say that as a citizen in Pewaukee, and I've lived here for over 20 years, that I would appreciate, people would appreciate more communication. So I think if you're thinking of that, that's a great idea. And also, I hope that you guys really do take into consideration the roundabout versus the stoplights because of that sports complex splash pad. I think with that, when it goes in, if the funding goes through, that alone is going to cause considerable more traffic. And with a stoplight there, I'm going to have people backed up to the Oaks waiting to get through that light. And again, my backyard is there, the park is there. It's just not an ideal situation. Whereas a roundabout, you will be able to move traffic smoothly. And that is it. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to personally thank Craig for doing it.
Jim, you need to state your name and address, please.
Jim Forrester, 3190 Gateway Road, Brookfield, Wisconsin. I'd like to personally thank Craig for doing a wonderful job in putting this strategic plan, preliminary plan together. I think he did a great job, and he did it principally all by himself, I presume. But it was an excellent job, and I think you're going in the right direction. I think he's got a lot of great ideas, and it's important to us as businessmen and developers in the community. You don't hear that too much from the citizens, but great job.
All right, thank you, Jim.
I feel bad that I'm the only one that didn't thank Craig. I want you to know I texted him before the meeting. We all really appreciate that work. We do.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Item 10, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, Rhodey.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you.
I looked so ungrateful sitting here. Like, Craig, you just